the existence of evil presents a profound philosophical challenge, particularly for those who believe in a benevolent and omnipotent God. This challenge, known as the problem of evil, grapples with the apparent contradiction between a loving God and a world filled with suffering. How can a God who is all-powerful and all-good allow pain, tragedy, and wickedness to persist? This question has haunted theologians, philosophers, and individuals for centuries. The problem of evil is not merely an abstract theological debate. It is a deeply personal and existential question that arises from our own experiences of suffering. When confronted with natural disasters, disease, violence, and cruelty, it is natural to question the nature of God and the purpose of our existence. The persistence of evil in a world supposedly created and governed by a loving God raises fundamental questions about the nature of God, the meaning of life, and the existence of free will. If God is all-powerful, why doesn't He prevent suffering? If God is all-knowing, doesn't He foresee and understand the pain that we endure? And if God is all-good, why does He allow innocent people to suffer? While there may not be any definitive answers, exploring the various arguments and perspectives surrounding the problem of evil can deepen our understanding of this enduring philosophical puzzle. The problem of evil hinges on the apparent incompatibility between the existence of a benevolent and omnipotent God and the reality of suffering in the world. To fully grasp the problem, it's crucial to define the key terms and concepts involved. First and foremost is the concept of God, often understood as a being possessing specific attributes: omnipotence or all-powerful, omniscience or all-knowing, and omnibenevolence or all-good. These attributes, while subject to varying interpretations, form the bedrock of many theistic beliefs. Evil, the other central concept, encompasses a broad spectrum of suffering and wrongdoing. It includes natural evils, such as earthquakes, diseases, and famines, which cause immense pain and destruction without any human agency. It also encompasses moral evils, which are acts of cruelty, violence, and injustice perpetrated by humans against one another. The problem of evil arises from the seeming contradiction between a God possessing the aforementioned attributes and the undeniable existence of both natural and moral evil in the world. If God is all-powerful, wouldn't He have the ability to prevent or eliminate suffering? If He is all-knowing, wouldn't He be aware of every instance of pain and suffering? And if He is all-good, wouldn't He be motivated to alleviate the misery and injustice that plague humanity? The problem of evil is further complicated by the sheer scale and variety of suffering in the world. From the agonizing pain of terminal illnesses to the devastating consequences of natural disasters, the forms of suffering are seemingly endless. The problem is not merely that suffering exists, but that it often appears to be random, unjust, and excessive. Innocent children suffer from debilitating diseases while wicked individuals prosper. The problem of evil is a profound philosophical challenge that forces us to confront the limits of our understanding and to grapple with the uncomfortable reality of suffering in a world supposedly created and governed by a loving God. Deductive arguments against the existence of God, stemming from the problem of evil, aim to demonstrate a logical incompatibility between the concept of an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent God and the reality of evil in the world. These arguments typically proceed by presenting a set of premises that are assumed to be true and then deducing a conclusion that contradicts the existence of such a God. One classic formulation of the deductive argument, often attributed to the philosopher Epicurus, argues that if God is willing to prevent evil but not able to, then He is not omnipotent. If He is able to prevent evil but not willing, then He is not omnibenevolent. And if He is both able and willing to prevent evil, then why is there evil in the world? This argument, known as the Epicurean paradox, highlights the apparent contradiction between God's attributes and the existence of evil. Another influential deductive argument is presented by the 18th century philosopher David Hume. Hume argues that the world appears to be designed with a mixture of good and evil, suggesting that the Creator is either indifferent to suffering or limited in His power to prevent it. Hume concludes that the evidence of evil in the world makes it more likely that the Creator is either not perfectly good or not all-powerful. Deductive arguments against God's existence, based on the problem of evil, face several criticisms. Critics argue that these arguments often rely on a simplistic understanding of God's attributes and fail to account for the possibility that God might have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil to exist. For example, God might allow suffering to facilitate soul-making, to preserve free will, or to achieve some greater good that is beyond our comprehension. Furthermore, Critics argue that deductive arguments often fail to consider the full range of possible solutions to the problem of evil. For instance, some philosophers have proposed that evil is not a distinct entity in itself, but rather a privation or absence of good, much like darkness is the absence of light. While deductive arguments based on the problem of evil raise important questions about the nature of God and the existence of suffering, they ultimately fall short of providing a definitive refutation of God's existence. Unlike deductive arguments that strive to demonstrate the logical impossibility of God's existence alongside evil, evidential arguments contend that the presence of evil, particularly gratuitous suffering, significantly diminishes the likelihood of God's existence. These arguments, often grounded in inductive reasoning, suggest that the world, as we observe it with its abundance of seemingly pointless pain and suffering, is not the kind of world we would expect a perfectly good and all-powerful God to create. One prominent proponent of the evidential argument from evil is the philosopher William Rowe. Rowe argues that the existence of intense suffering, particularly when it serves no greater purpose and could have been prevented by an omnipotent being, constitutes strong evidence against the existence of a loving God. He contends that while we might not be able to definitively prove that God doesn't exist, the sheer amount of gratuitous suffering in the world makes it highly improbable. Another influential figure in the evidential argument camp is the philosopher Paul Draper. Draper argues that the hypothesis of naturalism, which posits that the universe is not governed by any supernatural being or purpose, provides a more plausible explanation for the existence of evil than theism. He contends that naturalism can readily account for the presence of natural evils, such as diseases and natural disasters, as well as moral evils, which can be attributed to evolutionary processes and the complex interplay of biological and environmental factors. Evidential arguments from evil, while compelling to some, are not without their critics. One common criticism is that these arguments rely on a subjective assessment of what constitutes gratuitous suffering. What might appear to be pointless pain and suffering to us might serve a greater purpose that is beyond our limited human understanding. God, being omniscient, might have reasons for allowing suffering that we are simply not privy to. Another criticism is that evidential arguments often fail to adequately account for the vastness and complexity of the universe. Our planet, with its share of suffering, represents only a minuscule fraction of the cosmos. It is possible, some argue, that the suffering we observe on Earth is outweighed by an even greater amount of good or happiness elsewhere in the universe, even if we are not currently capable of perceiving it. While evidential arguments from evil present a significant challenge to traditional theistic beliefs, they do not definitively prove that God does not exist. So let's delve into the attempts to reconcile the existence of God with the presence of evil. Some argue that evil exists to highlight the good, creating a contrast that allows us to appreciate goodness even more deeply. Others suggest that evil serves as a test, a way for humans to grow morally and spiritually. It's quite a complex issue, isn't it? Now, moving on to justifying why a benevolent God might allow evil to exist. Some propose that free will is a crucial factor. Without the ability to choose, our actions would be meaningless. Free will, they say, comes with the risk of making bad choices, but it's essential for genuine love and goodness. Another perspective is that suffering and challenges are necessary for soul-making, helping individuals to develop virtues like courage and compassion. Finally, let's consider whether evil might be a necessary condition for moral goodness. Some philosophers argue that without the presence of evil, concepts like bravery, selflessness, and kindness wouldn't exist. In a world without suffering, there would be no need for acts of heroism or sacrifice. In the midst of suffering, we often search for meaning. Sometimes we find solace in the belief that our suffering has a purpose, a lesson to be learned, or a strength to be gained. Other times, the meaning is not so clear, and we are left grappling with the unknown. Throughout history, many explanations for evil have been proposed. Some see it as a test of faith, a way to strengthen our resolve and deepen our compassion. Others view it as a consequence of free will, the price we pay for the ability to make our own choices. Accepting the mystery of evil is perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of our journey. It's difficult to come to terms with the fact that some questions may never have clear answers. Yet, in this acceptance, we might find a certain peace. and understanding that not everything is within our control or comprehension. The search for meaning in a world with evil is an ongoing journey. We may never fully understand why evil exists, but in our search, we can find moments of connection, acts of kindness, and glimpses of hope. And perhaps it is in these moments that we find our greatest strength and our deepest humanity.